And joining us now, journalist and author Paola Ramos. She is contributor for MSNBC and Noticias Telemundo. Also joining us is independent reporter and former Washington Post columnist, my former colleague, Philip Bump. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, guys. It appears that the apocalypse that Republicans were predicting was going to happen did not happen. But Paola, what did you see yesterday on the streets?
So I was coming back from the Rio Grande Valley. So I spent the last week in the valley. And so a lot of people came out there, right? I think it's important to look at some of the most vulnerable places to really understand whether or not they were silenced by fear. And I think yesterday was a type of barometer. How far gone are we or not? And what you see in the Rio Grande Valley is, of course, a place that Donald Trump flips. There has been many ICE raids. It's full of checkpoints, extremely militarized, and yet people showed up. 1,000 people came out. There were protests in at least 3 parts of the Rio Grande Valley. But what sticks with me is what I felt is the sort of the trauma of the children that have been watching their parents live in the shadows. And it reminded me of Arizona's Joe Arpaio. And I was thinking about this effect that you have in Arizona, right, where Joe Arpaio essentially gave rise, right, to a whole new generation of people, of young people that watched their parents being criminalized, that held onto the trauma, and that then were able to turn that into political power. And that's what reminds me in the Rio Grande Valley, right? There's a whole generation of people that came out. 10 years from now, I think what we're seeing now will turn into something pretty profound.
That's interesting, because I was trying to talk to you about this morning, Eugene, but we got to talking about something else. But to me, it feels like we went through a whole week where Republicans, through their rhetoric, tried to plant the seeds for something. They're anti-American, they're this, they're that, they hate America. And yet what we saw yesterday was something completely different. And I was trying to say to Eugene this morning, I feel like there's a vibe shift happening that, despite everything that they said, people were like, bump that. I'm coming out, and I'm going to stand up for my country. And so that's why I'm thrilled to hear what you had to say, Paola, about all this. But Phil, were you out and about?
I unfortunately was not. I had a little league game. But yeah, I mean, but I was obviously tracking what was going on. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's, like, my stepmother, who teaches music in Texas, was wearing an inflatable hippo costume, right? I mean, like this is the level of engagement that people have, right? And I think a really important test here, and almost a challenge is, imagine if Donald Trump's supporters tried to match the energy. Like, we all know it would never happen. It can't happen, right? Like, he just doesn't have that level of support. And I think it's really important that it gives the lie to the idea that Donald Trump has the broad support of the majority of the American people. Because all of us know that couldn't happen. It just would not happen if Donald Trump supporters tried to gin up something that was equivalent to yesterday. And I think that indicates, okay, well, where is his support? It's online. He has, obviously there are a lot of Donald Trump supporters, but it just doesn't match this real world energy that you saw in the streets.
I mean, he did try to do something like this with his military parade earlier this year, and it was kind of a buzz when you look at the crowd. There were a lot of kind of congressional leaders and political leaders that were out yesterday. And I'll play some sound from Chris Murphy and Governor Pritzker about authority takeover and tyranny.
We are not on the verge of an authoritarian takeover. We are in the middle of an authoritarian takeover. But Trump has not won. Our democracy is in peril, but it can be saved.
Tyranny depends on good people doing nothing. It requires us to accept the unacceptable, to rationalize the irrational, to normalize the abnormal. But tyranny also fails when ordinary people refuse to cooperate, when they say no kings and they mean it.
Paola, one of the most important things I think that folks took from yesterday was they have agency.
Yeah.
And one of the things over the last 8 months that folks have watched Donald Trump stretch the bounds of power, push the idea of rule of law in this country, they have felt powerless. And I think when you talk to, and you do this a lot, talking to regular voters, they look to Washington as the place with all the power. And at the end of the day, it's just people. Bad things happen because just people do it. Really good things happen in this country because just people stand up and say, I'm not taking it anymore. So talk about the importance of, according to the organizer, 7 million people around the country, 2,700 events, and people saying, realize.
That was the Democrats' closing message,
Yeah.
right? And for some reason, people weren't feeling it. And I think Trump doesn't win because of his politics, right? He doesn't win because he had better policies. He wins because he was able to invoke feelings in his base, 2 feelings. It was fear and anger. And that's what you're seeing in this crowd. Finally, I think Americans understand the fear of authoritarianism, right? That's what we heard. And they understand the threat. And then there's anger, right? It's the anger of what Trump is doing. And I think if you combine both of those things, you rally people. And I think the question is, if you're an organizer, I think there's a third ingredient that is missing, or that may be missing, right? Which is all of this movement has to go beyond Trumpism.
Right.
It has to be beyond this anti-Trump campaign. And that's why when you see some of these posters, right? Donald Trump has got to go, yes. But the real question of this movement is, Americans voted for Trump again. Right? Trumpism is a symptom of something bigger in this country. And so I think the rallying cry behind this movement has to be why this country is capable constantly to going back, to going back to a dark side of history and taking this country where we are. And that's what the American Revolution was about, right? It wasn't just about taking King George out. It was about enslaved people that wanted something more. And it's the same, we're sort of in the same place in history.
And you can't, because for the left and for Democrats, you can't just be the opposition. You have to figure out a way to be the alternative.
Right.
Well, that is a hell no to Trump, but is it a hell yes to Democrats? I mean, that is the energy that we are seeing energy, but who is it necessarily geared towards right now? I mean, Trump's approval rating, if we can pull these up quickly, is diminishing. It's according to an AP NORC poll, October 9th to 13th, 37% approved stand right now, despite having one of the most unpopular presidents in American history.
Sure. So there are really 2 questions, right? There's the electoral question for Democrats, which there are all sorts of, ancillary considerations, the midterm election, new president, yada, 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 right? But I think, to your point, there's also the question of the Democrats as an institution of power, right? And one of the things that we saw the Democrats not do well during the first Trump administration was take the energy about Trump and turn it into something sustained, convert that into institutional power. And what we saw instead was indivisible. And we see now no kings that are taking that power, the aggregated power of a lot of people feeling frustrated and making something out of it. And the question is, do the Democrats figure out how to do that? Or do they
think Democrats weren't able to do that last
Because
year?
I think the Democratic Party
lack of sort of a big charismatic leader, or
no, I think it's
imagination.
Yeah, I think it's become a technocratic party, right? That you have people who are like, let's sit and look at what the polls say, and if people respond this way to the polls, then we're going to nod along with whatever people agree with. Instead of being like, here's our vision, here's what we want to do. This is the vision of the people in the streets. The Democratic Party should be seizing on it. The Democratic Party should have been leading these things, as opposed to following and coming along and having pundits who are saying, well, that's fine, but if you actually look at it, what people want to hear about is kitchen table issues. Like, clearly not. Like, again. My stepmom was in a hippo costume. Like, that's not because of kitchen table issues. Right?
But the great thing about this is the power, to your point about agency, the power is coming up from the grassroots. And a vital party is one that pays attention to the grassroots. Put the poll number put the poll numbers back up again, because we can focus on the Democrats, but I want to focus on Trump's approval rating among Republicans. I always say Donald Trump does not care about the overall approval rating. He cares about his standing with Republicans, and I want people to focus in on 77%. Yeah. I have never seen Trump's approval rating below 90 or below 89, 88. This is 77%. Am I making too much of the fact that his approval rating among Republicans seems to be not cratering, but tumbling? Jump ball.
Faltering.
Yeah, I mean, look. I think it's one poll. We should always recognize it's one poll. And, and you're right. This is a president who, during his first term, would constantly lie about how his approval rating was 98% among Republicans. Just make up numbers, right? So I'm sure he's going to make up some new number about this. I think that 22%, the flip side to that 77%, is also important. 1 in 5 Republicans disapprove of how Donald Trump is doing in this poll. I think that is the sort of thing where, if not Donald Trump, who seems to be pretty well isolated from reality at this point in time, someone around him is going to look at that and say, okay, this is actually not the direction we want to go in. And the sample size here is also important. It's 1,200
89 adults. This is not a poll of 500 people.
Yeah, and it's it's NRC, which is very reputable.
Yeah.
I think you oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You see it very clearly with immigration, right? And I think that's the dissonance where a majority of Republicans like his plans, they value his plans, but they're uncomfortable with the way in which he's doing it, right? And I think that's kind of the tough question here. Most of his base likes what they're seeing. They want the mass deportations. They're okay with parts of Trump's authoritarianism. They just don't want to feel uncomfortable by it.
And then when their neighbors get snatched up,
Exactly.
that's when
Then they
start
feel
having a real
something.
problem.
Because they believed they were all criminals and so on.
Right.
They believed
Exactly.
that, right.
Yeah.
And now American citizens.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
But yeah, so 1 in 5 Americans now doth protest if Trump.
What happened out there wasn't just another protest. It was a reality check. For weeks, Republicans had been screaming about chaos, anti-American radicals, and some kind of apocalyptic uprising. And then nothing like that happened. Instead of fear and silence, thousands of people poured into the streets. Even in the most militarized Republican flipped corners, like the Rio Grande Valley. You could feel the defiance. Kids who grew up watching their parents hide in the shadows are now stepping into the light. That's not politics. That's generational rage mutating into power. And here's the kicker. Trump's people couldn't match that energy even if they tried. His movement lives online, in rage rooms and echo chambers. Not in the real world. This was flesh, blood, and fire. But there's something even bigger here. This isn't just anti-Trump. That's too small. If this energy stops at no Trump, it dies after Election Day. But if it becomes a yes to something bigger, a vision, a future, then Trumpism will eventually eat itself. For the first time, cracks are showing in his fortress. GOP approval dropping from 90% to 77% may look like a number, but in politics, that's blood in the water. Even his loyalists are starting to squirm. They like the cruelty, just not the mess. They like the power, just not the mirror it holds up. That's not strength. That's rot. What we saw was a shift, not a vibe shift, a power shift. Fear is losing its grip. Authoritarianism feeds on silence. Yesterday, people roared back. If that roar turns into a movement with a backbone, Trump won't just lose an election, he'll lose the story he's been selling for years.